as always, run the numbers for us.
So we've got Tonight's the Night by Neil Young on Best Ever Albums list of the 70s. It comes in at number 112 and number 8 in the year 1975, number 483 of all time, and on Rolling Stone's list in the top 500, it comes in at number 302. It is also important to point out that on Best Ever Albums, it's his 6th highest rated album of all time.
And we've covered, let's do a thing. So we've covered Harvest.
Yeah.
Yep.
Everybody knows This Is Nowhere.
And After the Gold Rush.
Nowhere, and After the Gold Rush, right. So this is our 4th, and this is 6th in terms of the rankings.
Correct.
The other ones, are they coming later, or did we not cover them?
So we are going to cover On the Beach for sure.
So that's the album before this.
Yes. I don't know if we're going to there's Rust Never Sleeps is a live album, and it's currently ranked at number 99 on Best Ever Albums, and it's from 1979. So I don't know if we are covering that or not. That might not have made the top 100 when we put our list together.
Okay. Gotcha. Well, there's always room for stuff, yeah.
Yes. So looking at the spreadsheet, for the longest time, I kept thinking, all right, we're going to do Neil Diamond. But then I looked at when I typed in, you know how your brain sees one thing and it's not that. And then I started listening. I was like, oh, it's Neil Young. Okay.
That's an interesting thing to see.
So I see the picture on the album. It kind of looks like maybe that could be Neil Diamond. I mean,
yeah.
You know.
I don't know. My head wanted Neil Diamond, I guess.
Yeah.
But my heart got Neil Young. So this is I would say a departure for Neil Young from what we've heard so far. Basically, it's like a piano-driven Neil Young album. That's kind of what I heard on this, and it was more, well, he always splits it between acoustic and electric, I feel like, on his albums, and we get more of that as well. It also sounds more like a live album. Is it like, again, another fake live album though, where I heard different things and like kind of almost like not live background chatter, but like little defects or instruments moving or something like that throughout kind of the playing of the album and other artists. And I wonder if, again, that was intentional or if it was actual live album. But I don't know. I assume is he playing the piano on this too? I don't know. I think it might be somebody else playing the piano.
I would assume so.
Oh, no. You know who's playing the piano?
Nils Lofgren?
Nils Lofgren. Yep.
Yeah, because they name check him in the song. I think
I was going to say, because they
Nils
mentioned him.
or something like that.
Exactly.
So that's how I knew
That's
it.
how I knew it, yeah, because he said that. Yep.
Oh, I forgot about. Yeah, you're right. Okay.
So it's definitely piano driven. You still have the classic like Neil Young harmonica with his guitar playing, but I feel like it's bringing those other guys and Nils clearly up to the front more. So you still have the blues, you still have the country, you still have the rock, especially kind of on the back half of the album, but then they're just kind of incorporating more piano at the end of the day. But I heard pedal steel also. I heard that same kind of electric guitar feel. It sounded more, I don't know, just more like Nashville country almost in certain ways. That was kind of what I still enjoyed it. It's still the Neil Young singing voice that you may or may not like, but I enjoyed the album. I don't think it's as good as those other albums that we've talked about. And right off the bat, I feel like more strongly about those albums than this one. But this was an interesting departure.
Gotcha. Matt, what are your initial thoughts?
Yeah, to me, I didn't really know this. The only song I knew on this was "Tonight's the Night," and so to me, this album is the sound of Neil Young maturing. Kind of moving on. I agree with Josh. It sounds like a departure, certainly from the last three albums that we covered. His first three of his first four. I kind of felt like this sounded like a little bit of the Neil that you get, sometimes in the 80s or even later. There's some songs in here where he's not even really singing, he's just speaking. And I know the album Greendale, it's what is Neil Young's concept album from, like, I don't know, 15 years ago or something like that. It's okay, but there's plenty of parts in it where it seems like he's talking. It's like telling a story. And so I was kind of reminded a little bit of that when I was listening here. So I liked it. I didn't love it. I'm a little disappointed in this. I was hoping to like it more. It didn't seem as raw to me as some of the other Neil stuff that we got.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it.
That's so funny you say that, because I felt totally opposite. But continue.
Really?
I
feel like and not to say that the albums that we've covered already were all just like, these blistering rock songs, because that's not the case at all. But there's definitely some really, stripped down tunes that he did. But I don't know. This is Neil getting a little bit less, I don't know, raw to me, and losing a little bit of his edge, losing a little bit of his fastball too. There's still elements of Crosby, Stills, and Nash on here. You can totally, that it sounds like,
Yeah, to the point like they could be singing on this.
Yeah, I don't think that they are. I did just take a look. I didn't see their names pop up on my initial glance, so I don't think that they are. But it's definitely kind of in that realm a little bit. There's a lot of country stuff on here too. He's still delving in that, which is fine. With slide guitars, and I think probably Roll Another Number for the Road might be the most country sounding Neil Young song I've ever heard. That's very country in its tone, which is fine. I like it.
I wrote down old time country for that.
Old time country, yeah. It's kind of somber as well. So yeah, I liked it. I probably would like to listen to this more, because I love Neil Young. When he hits for me, he really hits. I think, but I was just left a little bit like, oh man, I was hoping to be like blown away, and I wasn't blown away. So, but again, it was only one listen. I thought Mellow My Mind was interesting, because I don't think I've ever heard his voice cracks a lot, but I've never heard it crack like it does on that song. It seems like he's particularly going out of his way to make it it's almost like a screeching kind of just cracking of his voice. And some of the guitar tone a little bit. I was on Speaking Out. I heard a little bit of a Mark Knopfler crisp guitar sound to it, like a little bit more of a produced crisp guitar sound. So it's interesting. I love Neil. He moves on to different stuff, and I think it's fine. He's trying different sounds and trying different things, but I wasn't blown away by it on one listen. So I would probably like to listen to it more to see if I can get a little bit more into it.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Well, I'm glad you guys talked about the sound musically a little bit, because I'm going to go in a total... Never has there been a difference of like as a lyrics guy, this album, I was like, what is going on with Neil Young's life? Because the songs are interesting but bleak. And to the point where he's writing about... Neil Young has that thing where he writes about, old man. He's writing about a generalized generalized person. These don't feel like that. So then the question for me became, is Neil Young writing as Neil Young here, or is Neil Young writing about specific people? Because it is a remarkably stark album lyrically. And so I said, I have to know the context of it, because outside of that, it's, as you guys mentioned, he goes, in some areas he's a little bit more plugged in, a little bit more he's more country, and a little bit more it's more folk, but it's the same genres you kind of expect from that sense, it's not going to be a departure of, like, Neil Young dabbles in these styles, but it's not like when he, the ones where, he's dabbling with, like, electronic music and stuff later, where it's like, well, okay, now he's trying to just actually invert stuff. So that's still there, and it's still the Neil Young voice, right? Which I would argue in this, it's much harder to ignore Neil Young voice if you don't like it than any other album we've covered, because it's front and center. And I think some of that is because it's designed to be, because the lyrics and the vocal content, it's not as abstract as Neil Young can be at times, and just sort of writing with it. So I became fascinated because I'm like, okay, I have to know what is going on in Neil Young's life at this point, because there's clearly stuff going on, because you don't write songs like this, right, that are like this unless something's going on. And of course the answer is all the things were going on in Neil Young's life. So least shocking thing ever was that was going on. So the big themes of this album, as I look back now lyrically, and you can hear it when you know this, but I think I was even able to piece some of these together as I was listening. A second straight person that was close to Neil Young died in this. So his roadie in this case, a guy by the name of Bruce Berry. So if you remember from A Harvest, right, Needle and the Damage Done is about the guitar player, right? So this is a second drug. So there's definitely an anti-drug sentiment on this album when you listen. Like, before I even went into this, I was like, is this him writing about his own addiction? Is this him writing about, that person we know before? But the song Tired Eyes, for example, is basically, when you listen to it lyrically, it's just about basically saying to this person, he tried hard, right? But just life was too hard, right? And that's kind of was what the theme of Needle and the Damage Done was too. And you're like, boy, he's really, I think there's even a line where he goes like, he tried his best, but he could not at one point. It's like, well, it's pretty straightforward, right? And so then the other thing that seems to be a theme of this is like, this is where Neil Young becomes like completely disenfranchised with fame, right? Now he's always had that underpining, right? And that rebel heart a little bit, but this is where like he's not only acting that way, but he's putting it on paper. And a big theme of this seems to be that when he went out on tour, the tour for this was kind of a mess, because apparently he was a mess, right? And so the tour featured him struggling with his voice, and when they're playing, they're not tight, it's really loose, and you can see all of that on this album, because it is kind of like an unwieldy album. And you mentioned, Matt, I'm glad you did, the like voice breaking, right? And not in like the Neil Young singing style where it could sound like it's like a true break. And apparently that was because he it just was raw pain, in a way and stuff. And so that is kind of my takeaway from this. It's almost impossible for me to evaluate this album in the way I evaluated the other ones, because to me, the takeaway for me on this album is going to be pretty standard issue Neil Young sounding album. In fact, you could make an easy argument, and I get why you guys got there, that this is the least impressive music album we've covered from Neil Young. There's the least amount of good guitar parts. There's the least amount of interesting compositions. But lyrically, this is by far the most interesting Neil Young album we've covered, in my opinion. Yeah. And Harvest was a damn good one. Don't get me wrong. And he writes great songs on all of them, but he never writes songs this bald and this emotionally available. And he did later in his career, and I like you said, Matt, I can't help but wonder if this is like where he turned the corner as an artist in terms of the style. So so I give it a slight thumbs up, in the sense that I was fascinated lyrically by this album throughout, and listening to the music, it became clear in a way that sometimes happens for me. It became clear that I wanted to know more about what he was singing about, because I got a feel for it that was like, okay, time to listen to what's going on here.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense now I know what you're saying, disagreeing with my comment about it not being as raw as his other, because lyrically,
musically it isn't. I agree with you.
Yeah, and that's where I was coming at it from, because I was looking at it more of the musical standpoint. But it doesn't surprise me. I didn't know any of the context of what was going on with him, or like any pain or whatever. But it doesn't surprise me that he was experiencing those things after with listening to this album, because there's something missing there with the edge or the power, I want to say emotion, but not, because he's certainly emoting, right? So the emotion's there, but just it's in a different way, and it to me it didn't translate as well musically. As
I wrote down some
stuff.
some isolated lyrics to give you an idea, but he like there's to give you an idea of the feel of this album. He's writing things like "A million miles away from that helicopter day." He's saying "starving to be alone, independent from the scene that I've known." Right? Find somewhere where they don't care who I am comes up at one point. The world on a string doesn't mean anything. I mean, he's constantly banging that drum, with metaphors. And like after a while, I know you guys aren't lyric guys, but like if I had told you listen to the lyrics, I think you guys would have been like, whoa, okay,
the one that I picked out that kind of made me laugh was on Borrowed Tune. He was like singing a borrowed tune from the Rolling Stones, too wasted to write my own.
Yes. And it's that's what I'm saying. It's like, you know what I'm talking about though, right? Like, when Neil Young is talking about these people, you get the idea that some of it's him, but there's also a level of detachment. I never got that feeling on this album. I felt like it felt like Neil Young speaking to me as Neil Young, like on this album, which is such a departure from what the other albums sounded like. So, because he ain't Joni Mitchell historically, right?
Yeah.
Writing personal stuff. So
yeah, there's not looking over the track. There's not a clear single on this album either. It's not. I don't feel like it's designed based on everything you've said to be kind of a more commercial like chart hit or album hit, and because of that personal nature, he wasn't like that wasn't in his mindset, or it just didn't happen.
Well, and that deal and Matt, you probably are familiar with this, and Josh, you may be as well, but like throughout his career, Neil Young has had these albums made, and he's famous for having an album and the last second like not releasing it and releasing another album instead. And so this is the first time he did that. Apparently, like Crosby, Stills, and Nash and Young went on a tour, right? And then the record company's like, all right, this tour was super successful. Neil, put out an album. And I guess he had one that he'd played and stuff, and they were aware of it. And at the last second, he threw an Audible out and released this instead. And they said the record label was like infuriated because this was like, as you guys mentioned, a departure, right? And didn't, sell like it did. But and therein lies Neil Young, right? He's
there were no singles from this record.
Yeah.
No, that's I'm sure the record company's like, what the hell's going on here?
How are we going to market this?
Yeah, the only reason I knew "Tonight's the Night," the song, was because it's on the I have the album Live Rust, a live album that he did, I don't know, late 70s, early 80s, something like that. I think it's in late 70s.
It has
that was on there.
It has that cool like down.
It is 79, man.
Yeah.
79, yeah. And I think I like there's two versions of it on this record, and I think I like the second one better. It's like a bluesier, like there's a little bit more going on there musically. But
Part 2.
Yeah, it's I think that this is kind of like this seems like Neil diverging, because I'm looking at the albums that came out after this one, and I'm like, I don't really know these albums. You know what I mean? So it's like so I think he's kind of going a little bit of a different direction, which is fine.
One last thing, Matt, that I'll mention. You know what this album